It began with whispers in the corridors of power, whispers that no one dared to say too loudly. The president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, was rumored to be planning something unusual, something bold, something that would test the very people he trusted most. These whispers carried a weight that made soldiers shift uneasily in their boots, and ministers cast furtive glances at one another during late-night meetings. Few leaders in modern history had ever gone so far as to secretly test their own guards. But this was not a man who played by the old rules. To Traoré, loyalty was not a word you could simply swear under oath. It was a truth proven in the darkest and most unexpected of moments. And so, under the cloak of secrecy, he began a plan that would shake the nation. The sun had barely risen when the first stage was set in motion. The capital city, Ouagadougou, lay under its usual haze of heat and dust, the streets humming with vendors setting up stalls and schoolchildren shuffling to class. Yet within the heavily fortified presidential compound, tension coiled like a spring. The guards on duty had no idea that today would be unlike any other. Traoré had decided he would disguise himself, not as a soldier, not as a politician, but as something even more dangerous, an ordinary man in distress, stripped of the authority that usually made doors swing open and heads bow. He wanted to know, with his own eyes and ears, who among his guards was truly loyal to him and who wore only the mask of loyalty for the sake of power. The transformation began quietly. His aides, sworn to silence, provided him with ragged clothes, worn-out sandals, and a cap pulled low to shadow his face. His clean-shaven jaw was left to grow stubble for several days prior, and dust was rubbed onto his cheeks to dull his usually commanding presence. By the time he looked at his reflection, even he had to pause. Could this really be the man who commanded thousands? The leader whose speeches sent waves of hope through the people? Slipping through a side exit, shielded from cameras and prying eyes, Traoré positioned himself near the outer gates of the palace. Here, the test would begin. His plan was simple, but ruthless. He would approach his own guards as if he were a poor, desperate man seeking help. What they did, or failed to do, would reveal more about their character than any oath or salute ever could. The first guard barely spared him a glance. Standing tall with his rifle resting across his chest, the soldier shifted his eyes over Traoré's disguised figure and frowned. "Move along," he muttered coldly, not even recognizing the man behind the disguise. His tone was sharp, dismissive, the kind of voice reserved for beggars who linger too close to the seat of power. Traoré nodded silently and shuffled back. A note was made. The second guard reacted differently. When Traoré asked for a sip of water, the soldier squinted, his lips curling into suspicion. "Why are you here? This isn't a place for people like you," he barked. His hand tightened on his weapon, not out of duty but irritation. Again, Traoré withdrew. Another note was made, but then came the third guard. When the disguised president stumbled deliberately to the ground, clutching his leg in feigned pain, this guard immediately rushed forward. "Are you all right, old man?" he asked with genuine concern. Setting his weapon aside, he crouched and offered a hand. His eyes showed no recognition of who he was helping, only compassion for a stranger in need. Traoré's heart stirred at the sight. He had found at least one man whose loyalty went beyond orders. This was only the beginning. The president returned to his chambers later that day, peeling off the disguise in silence. His inner circle watched him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What had he discovered? Had the men he trusted proven themselves worthy, or had they failed him? He revealed nothing, not yet. for the test was far from over. What had happened at the gates was merely the first chapter of a larger, more dangerous plan, one that would force every guard, every aide, and every official to confront the truth of their loyalty. That night, as the city slept under a blanket of stars, Traoré sat alone by the window of his office. The disguise lay folded neatly beside him, its dust and sweat soaking the fabric like a symbol of the day's revelations. His thoughts were heavy. How many around him wore false faces? How many swore allegiance only to power, not to principle? He could hear the faint hum of the night patrols outside, boots scraping against the pavement, rifles clinking softly against uniforms. These were the men sworn to protect his life. But could he truly trust them with it? The memory of the compassionate guard replayed in his mind, a small flicker of hope amid the shadows of doubt. Yet even that hope came with a question. If a man could show kindness to a stranger, could he still be trusted to defend his leader when enemies closed in? Loyalty, after all, was not only about compassion. It was about courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to act when the moment demanded it. The test would continue, but the risks were enormous. If even one guard suspected what he was doing, word could spread like wildfire. And in a nation where whispers carried the weight of truth, such knowledge could make him vulnerable not only to betrayal within, but to enemies outside. Still, he pressed forward. Because for Ibrahim Traoré, leadership was not about titles or ceremonies. It was about truth, and the only way to find the truth was to risk everything for it. Tomorrow, the second stage of his secret test would begin. And this time, it would not be as simple as asking for a drink of water or feigning a stumble. Tomorrow, the president would push his guards to their very limits, without them even knowing who was really watching. The following morning broke with a deceptive calm. The air was crisp, carrying with it the aroma of fried dough from street vendors who were already at work. Yet, within the presidential compound, unseen currents of tension swirled. Ibrahim Traoré, still determined to pursue his secret test, prepared himself for what would come next. If the first day had been about observation, this second day would be about confrontation. This time, he would not disguise himself as a beggar or a weary traveler. Instead, he would engineer scenarios that forced his guards into split-second decisions, where their choices could not be rehearsed or hidden behind stiff salutes. He needed to see what lived in their hearts when duty collided with fear, when orders clashed with morality. The plan was devised with the precision of a military operation. At dawn, he summoned two of his most trusted aides, men who had proven their loyalty over the years, not through words but through sacrifices no one else had noticed. They were instructed to create incidents near the palace gates, a staged fight, a sudden alarm, a false emergency. The guards would believe it all to be real. Their reactions would be watched, measured, and remembered. By midday, the trap was set. The first scenario unfolded near the west gate, where a scuffle broke out between two men. From a distance, it looked genuine. Shouts, shoves, fists flying. The guards rushed forward, rifles at the ready, their boots pounding against the earth. Yet what Traoré observed through a hidden vantage point was telling. Some guards tried to calm the fight with discipline and restraint, while others resorted to brutality, striking down the men without hesitation. The fight was fake, but the anger in their blows was not. Later that afternoon, a staged alarm rang through the compound. Rumors of an intruder attempting to breach the wall. The guards scrambled into formation, adrenaline spiking, orders shouted in frantic bursts. One guard froze, paralyzed by fear, his hands trembling on the grip of his weapon. Another barked at him furiously, dragging him into position. But in the chaos, a small group held steady, communicating calmly, moving with precision, protecting the vulnerable instead of abandoning them. Traoré's eyes narrowed. Those were the men he was looking for, the ones who could face panic without losing themselves. But the most dangerous test came at night. As the moon climbed high over Ouagadougou, a shadowy figure crept toward the eastern fence of the palace. The guards spotted him instantly. "Stop!" one shouted, rifle raised. The intruder bolted, sprinting across the sand. A chase erupted. Shouts filled the night, boots thundered, and shots cracked through the darkness. The figure stumbled, fell, and the guards surrounded him. What they did not know was that the intruder was no enemy. It was another loyal aide in disguise. And the bullets fired were blanks. Yet what happened next chilled Traoré to the core. Some guards, realizing the man was down, struck him viciously, kicking and spitting, as if their uniforms had given them the right to treat weakness with contempt. Others, however, rushed to secure him, but checked his pulse, shielded his body, and carried him carefully despite believing he was a threat. Their humanity had not been erased by the uniform. When the exercise ended, Traoré retreated once more into the solitude of his office. He removed his cap, leaned back in his chair, and closed his eyes. The day's revelations weighed heavily upon him. He had seen courage, cruelty, fear, and compassion, all laid bare in the reactions of men who thought no one was watching. The irony was not lost on him. These men had sworn oaths before the flag, oaths that sounded noble in public. Yet it was in the hidden, unplanned moments that their true selves emerged. And those truths would determine not only his safety, but the fate of an entire nation. He began to take notes, scribbling names, actions, details. Some guards would need to be dismissed quietly before they betrayed him in a moment of crisis. Others deserved to be elevated, rewarded, trusted with greater responsibility. But what troubled him most was the gray area, the men who faltered, who wavered, who showed flashes of both loyalty and weakness. What should be done with them? Were they redeemable, or would hesitation one day cost lives? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was one of the aides who had staged the fight earlier that day. "Excellency," the man said, softly. "May I speak?" Traoré gestured for him to enter. The aide hesitated, then bowed his head. "Sir, forgive me, but this test you are running, it is dangerous. If word spreads, if even one guard discovers your plan, it could turn them against you. They might see it as a trick, a humiliation. Men do not like to be tested in secret." The Haidu president's eyes hardened. And yet, without truth, what protection do I have? What good are guards who crumble at the first sound of chaos? What good are promises made in comfort if they cannot hold under fire? His voice was low but firm, carrying the weight of conviction. The aide bowed again, retreating in silence. Left alone, Traoré rose and walked to the window. The compound stretched out before him, dotted with torches and restless shadows of men on patrol. Each silhouette represented a choice, a test, a question. Which of them would take a bullet for him? Which of them would turn their rifle at the ID, first sign of weakness? He had no illusions about the stakes. Leaders throughout history had been betrayed not by their enemies, but by the very guards sworn to protect them. Caesar, Sankara, countless others whose legacies had been cut short by treachery close at hand. Traoré knew he was not immune. If anything, His rising popularity made him an even bigger target, not just for foreign powers, but for those within his own circle who coveted power. That night, as the compound quieted and the stars flickered like watchful eyes above, he made a decision. The tests would continue, but they would grow even more extreme. Tomorrow would bring not just staged emergencies, but moral dilemmas, choices that would reveal not only courage, but conscience. Because a guard without conscience was just as dangerous as a guard without courage. The next day dawned heavier than the ones before, as if the air itself carried the weight of what was about to unfold. Inside the compound, soldiers adjusted their uniforms, polished their rifles, and went about their routines with no idea that every move, every decision, would soon be measured against an invisible scale. Ibrahim Traoré had decided. Today would not be about strength, nor fear, nor quick reflexes. Today would be about morality. His test was deceptively simple. He would orchestrate situations where the guards were forced to choose, not between obedience and disobedience, but between humanity and cruelty. For in the eyes of the president, a guard who could not see the dignity of another human being was no guard at all, but a danger in uniform. By mid-morning, the first test was underway. Near the southern entrance, an aide disguised as a frail old man approached the guards. His limp was exaggerated, his voice weak. He begged for a moment's shelter from the punishing sun. Some guards laughed, shoving him back toward the road. "Move along, old man," one sneered. Another threatened him with the butt of his rifle. But two guards stepped forward, shielding him from the others. They offered him water, helped him to sit in the shade, and one even whispered, "We'll get in trouble, but you need rest." From his hidden vantage, Traoré's jaw tightened. This was what he had hoped for. Not perfection, not robotic obedience, but evidence of men whose hearts still remembered what it meant to be human. The second test came at noon. A cart loaded with goods, pushed by a young woman, was tipped deliberately near the western gate. The items spilled, fruits, bread, clothes, scattering across the dirt. The guards watched her struggle, sweat dripping from her forehead, as she bent to gather the mess. Some laughed openly, mocking her. One even kicked an orange away, smirking as she reached for it. But again, a handful of guards bent down quietly, helping her pick up the scattered belongings, placing them back on the IBD cart without asking for thanks. Their actions were small, almost invisible in the noise of the day. Yet, to Traoré, they revealed more loyalty than 1,000 salutes. But it was the third test that revealed the harshest truth. Late in the afternoon, a staged prisoner was dragged to the courtyard. His wrists were bound, his face bruised with makeup, his clothes torn. The guards were told he was a suspected traitor, caught spying near the walls. In reality, he was another aide. The order was given: hold him, interrogate him. Do not let him escape. The responses were chilling. Some guards immediately struck him, fists and boots pounding into his ribs. Others jeered, their eyes glittering with cruelty, as if the suffering of a powerless man was entertainment. Yet, amidst the violence, a few guards hesitated. One even stepped between the prisoner and his fellow soldiers, shouting, "Enough! This is not justice!" His voice cracked, his hands shook, but he stood firm. Another tried to loosen the prisoner's bonds quietly, pretending it was part of his duty. Hidden in the shadows, Traoré felt a storm rage within him. He had seen loyalty, yes. He had seen kindness, yes. But he had also seen the darkness lurking in the hearts of men who wore his uniform. Men who, unchecked, could become executioners rather than protectors. When the staged prisoner was finally led away, the compound returned to its uneasy rhythm. The guards resumed their posts, never realizing their fates had been sealed in those brief, unguarded moments. That night, Traoré gathered his notes, each page marked with names, actions, and decisions. He read them aloud to himself, his voice heavy. This one mocked the old. This one helped. This one struck without mercy. This one shielded the weak. The words cut into him. It was not just a list of soldiers. It was a mirror of the nation itself, its cruelty, its compassion, its cowardice, its courage. Alone in his chamber, he poured a glass of water and sat in silence. The weight of leadership pressed upon him. To purge the disloyal was necessary, but to reward the loyal was urgent. For if he could not surround himself with men of both courage and conscience, then his presidency was already living on borrowed time. He closed his eyes and pictured the faces of those who had failed, the ones who struck the prisoner with glee, who mocked the weak, who laughed at the suffering of the poor. Their betrayal had not yet been revealed to them, but in his mind, they were already gone. Then he pictured the others, the ones who bent to help, who stood against cruelty even at risk to themselves. These were the men he would keep close, for they had shown him something stronger than obedience. They had shown him humanity. Outside, the compound seemed calm. The torches flickered. The air was thick with the scent of dust and heat. Yet, within those walls, decisions were being made that would reshape the very structure of power. For the president now knew who could be trusted with his life and who could not. Tomorrow, the whispers would begin. Guards reassigned, some dismissed, others promoted. No one would know the truth of why, only that the president seemed to see more than any man should. And in the silence of that mystery, Ibrahim Traoré would grow stronger, because his secret test had not only revealed the hearts of his guards, it had revealed the destiny of his rule.